Madam Chair, we're live.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to tonight's meeting of the Finance and Governance Committee of Georges River Council. I declare the meeting open at 6:05 p.m. We'll start with the acknowledgement of country. The Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which this meeting is being held as that of the Badigal people of the Eora Nation. Staff and public are reminded that this meeting is open and that the meeting is being broadcast live to the public on Council's website in accordance with Section 4 of Council's Code of Meeting Practice. The Code of Meeting Practice states that only if the meeting moves into a closed confidential session in accordance with Section 13 of the Code of Meeting Practice will the public broadcasting of the meeting be suspended. Council's Code of Meeting Practice prohibits the electronic recording of meetings without the express permission of Council. Mobile phones must be turned to silent during the meeting. I believe we have full attendance tonight, so no apologies to be recorded. Disclosure of interest. Do any councillors have any interest to declare on any of the items on the business paper tonight? No? Okay. We'll move to public participation. I believe there are no speakers registered for tonight's meeting. Yep. So we will move on to the first item of business, which is the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting, which is FIN 019-22, confirmation of the minutes of the Finance and Governance Committee held on the 11th of April 2022.
Move that.
Councillor Green has moved that.
I'll second that.
Councillor Symington has seconded that. And just before I put that motion, I just wanted to just repeat for the record at this meeting some of the comments we made at the council meeting. The minutes record that the mayor voted against the motion at the motions at the last council meeting, and just there's a note in the minutes clarifying that when the votes were called, the mayor was not asked for the vote and therefore didn't participate in voting, and therefore in accordance with the Code of Meeting Practice, that's the reason why his vote was recorded as against the item and not because he didn't want to support those motions. So just wanted to clarify that for the minutes here tonight. And now that we've done that, I'll put the motion. If the staff could please take the vote.
Thank you. Madam Chair, your vote, please.
For the motion.
Councillor Green.
For the motion.
Councillor Jamieson.
Reluctantly for the motion. I just feel a bit funny with the minutes, like saying the minutes were passed, but saying that a bit Nick Catras just feels that wasn't the true reflection of the minutes. So the motions were passed, happy for that, but I just
I'll
think
take that as a vote for. Thank you, Councillor Jamieson. Councillor Marnie. For. Councillor Symington. For. And Mr. Mayor.
For.
Thank you. I'll declare that motion carried. Okay, so we move into the committee reports, and the first item is FIN 020-22. It's the instrument of delegation of functions to the General Manager. Before we call for a mover and seconder, I think I would like to have some discussion in terms of the recommendation and some explanation. And to the Acting General Manager, I believe we have...
Please ask for a move, but we do need to actually move a recommendation, whether it be the one that's on the screen or other.
Sure.
I'll move that, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councillor Symington will move it. And Mayor Catras will second it. Thank you. Sorry. And I believe we have Lindsay Taylor online to answer any questions about the recommendation. I'd like to start with some questions just on item B of the recommendation around the rates and charges and the amount of $10,000 where any amount above that is written off by resolution of council. Could we just have a bit more explanation on that? I understand that if it's below $10,000, does this give the General Manager the delegation to write off the amount, or does the debt, the rates debt accrue Or if we could just have some explanation on that, please, Dr. Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the first thing I should say is that there are two clauses in the Local Government General Regulation 2021, two sections in fact, which control the process by which the council may write off rates, charges and debts. And the important thing to understand is that these procedures are quite separate to the council's delegations. So as far as the delegations are concerned, the council does not delegate the power to write off rates, charges and debts. And the reason is because they are dealt with quite specifically in two sections in the regulations. And I'll just explain them to you. The sections are mirror images of each other. One is section 131 and the other one is section 213 of the regulations. Each section sets out a procedure for writing off rates, charges or debts. And the procedure is this, that the council must, by resolution, determine the amount, fix the amount above which an individual rate or charge or an individual debt must be written off by resolution of the council. So the amount the council fixes is the amount above which only the council by resolution can write off the rate, charge or debt. Once the council fixes that amount, any amount below that can be written off by order in writing by the General Manager. And both sections go on to say that in the absence of a council resolution fixing an amount above which only it can write off rate, charges and debts, then all rates, charges and debts can only be written off by resolution of the council. So in short, the council has the power to fix an amount. Above that amount, only the council can write off the rates, charges or debts by resolution. And below that amount, the General Manager can write them off by order in writing. But if the council chooses not to fix an amount, then all debts can only be written off by the council. So that's the first point to make. Second point to make is the amount of $10,000 is not specified anywhere in the legislation. This is just an amount that I understand the staff are proposing to you. So you can choose whatever amount it is that you think is appropriate, or you can simply choose not to fix an amount at all. But you need to be aware that if you don't fix an amount, you will be responsible for writing off all rates, charges and debts of no matter what amount, and you'll have to do it at a meeting and by resolution.
Could I just seek clarification of the differences between the rates and charges and the debts? Because the recommendation we have has item B relating to rates and charges and item C relating to debts. And I understand the debts might be fines for dumping rubbish or non-compliance on a building site or something like that. And the rates and charges is people's rates on their home.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So section 131 is the section that deals with the procedure for writing off rates and charges. Now the Act and the regulations specify circumstances in which rates and charges can be written off. They're restricted. So what section 131 says is the procedure you use. And it also sets out the circumstances when you can use that procedure. And you're quite right, it is rates and charges, statutory charges such as domestic waste management charges. The other section, which is section 213, deals with debts, and what the examples you gave are correct. Another example I would give is a fee for service charged by the council under its revenue policy. So I think you can think of it as debts are anything other than rates and charges for our purposes.
The Acting General Manager has a comment.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to confirm with Dr. Taylor, and that is that no matter what debt is written off by council, it has to be listed as part of the annual report. So the transparency of what is written off is still released to both council and the community. Is that correct, Dr. Taylor?
That is correct. And look, probably it would be useful to read to the councillors, the committee, the restriction on writing off rates, charges or debts. Now, this applies to the council by resolution. It also applies to you, David, as the General Manager, so it applies to both. The restrictions are these. The rates, charges or debts can only be written off in 4 circumstances. Firstly, if there has been an error in the assessment. Secondly, if the amount isn't lawfully recoverable. Thirdly, if a court has made a decision that the write-off should occur. And lastly, if the council or the General Manager believes on reasonable grounds that an attempt to recover would not be effective. So you can see that in terms of protections, I suppose, that there's no general power to just for either the council or the General Manager to just willy-nilly write off any rates, charges or debts. That the circumstances are quite limited. And so that in and of itself provides, I think, some protection to the council as far as deciding whether or not it fixes an amount above which only it can write off and below which the General Manager can write off.
Thank you. I'll just ask another question to the Acting General Manager, which is the rates and charges. If someone applies under the council's hardship policy, that they're having difficulty to pay their rates or things like that, that wouldn't necessarily be written off. It's treated differently. If you could explain that, please.
Through you, Madam Chair, we do have a hardship policy which gives the opportunity for ratepayers or pensioner ratepayers to not actually have to pay their rates. Their rates would be collectible when they passed. So in other words, it means that the rates would accumulate until the property became available for sale or transferred to a sibling, and that's when the money would be collected for the outstanding rates.
And so what would be an example of where rates and charges may be written off?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, it all comes back to the circumstances. It depends on the circumstances of each and every claim that may be given. You know, it could be, you know, someone's lost their job. There's been sickness in the family which has caused disruption to the income base that they rely upon on a weekly basis. You know, as I say, there's a myriad of reasons why it may be considered appropriate to write those rates and charges off. But as Dr. Taylor rightly said, that there's only 4 cases that or categories that they can fall under, and they're quite limited in what can actually be written off.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. Does any other councils have any other questions on the rates and charges or the debts before we move on to the final item D of the recommendation?
I do. Sorry, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, just had a few questions. How many do we get and how often? And it, like, just as a ballpark figure, especially during COVID, was this used to do a lot of writing off debts, or do you have any, like, how often would it be used?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, I'd have to go back and look through our annual report to come up with those figures. What I can do for council is to make sure that I have those figures available prior to the next council meeting and distributed, so council can see exactly how many how many people are involved in having their rates and or charges written off. So I'd take that question on notice, Madam Chair.
Councillor Jamieson, is there any other questions from you?
Yes, and I was going to ask another question through you to David. Do you think is 10,000? I assume you've been doing this. What did we have last year or previously? Is 10,000 a good figure? Is it too high, too low? What are your thoughts on it?
My thoughts are that I think 10,000 is a fair figure. I don't think it should be any higher. I think there's got to be some capping on that figure, and I think 10,000 is a figure that I'd be happy to work within. Again, as I say, that there really is no opportunity for something to slip through the cracks. You know, it is reported in the annual report, and I think that that's the saving grace, though everyone can see exactly what is being written off. So, you know, you just can't write stuff off for your mates or willy-nilly or whatever. It's got to be a legitimate reason, and it's got to be a reason that's that certainly passes any pub test.
And to that point, the debts are listed in the annual report, as you mentioned. Any debts that are written off? Councillor Symington?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to the Acting General Manager, Mr. Tuxford. To Mr. Tuxford, just generally with councils, is that like a standard amount with the 10,000?
Through you, Madam Chair, look, I can't give you a definitive answer whether it's a standard or not. Dr. Taylor might be in a better position to comment on that, because no doubt he'd be the author of many instruments of delegation for council. So I might pass that one to Dr. Taylor if I can.
Well, look, the amounts differ from council to council, but I think, to pick up David's point, the amounts are never particularly high, if I can put it that way. Obviously, I'm making an assumption that $10,000 isn't particularly high. It would be very unusual to see the power given to the General Manager to write off debts substantially larger than that. I prepared an instrument for another council earlier this year, and in fact, while I'm speaking to you, councillors, I'm just going to see if I can quickly find it. Yes, here we are. And the amount that was in that instrument, well, look at this. The amount in that instrument was $1,000. So that's not to say, I think $1,000 is lower than usual, I should say, but just to illustrate the point, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 would be not unusual. $1,000 is probably unusually low. $5,000, $10,000 would be not unusual. Amounts significantly larger than 10,000 would be unusual.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Councillor Marnie, did you have a question?
Councillor Simons asked. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, the final part of that recommendation is in relation to the instrument of delegation of functions to the General Manager. Now, if I could just clarify, my understanding is that the current recommendation is that we grant to the General Manager all the functions, powers and authorities that the council can delegate that is not listed in the Local Government Act that says you can't delegate it. We give all of those functions, excluding what is listed in Schedule 2. If the Acting General Manager or Dr. Taylor could clarify that.
That's correct. That's correct, and that's the usual way of doing it. The important thing is to focus on things which are excluded and things which you wish to impose conditions or limitations on. But your statement is correct, Councillor.
Okay. I have some thoughts around the section 3 of the schedule 2, which is the granting of leases and licenses of the land. Currently, and I believe this is a carry on from the existing delegations, it says that the general manager must not grant a lease or license exceeding 21 years. I guess question to the acting general manager is, or even to Dr. Taylor, is that a standard that you see at other councils? To me, it feels like a long time. Is that something that you recommend? Obviously, it is a recommendation because it's come through this report, but I'd like to hear your feedback on that length of time of 21 years.
Sure. Councillor, could I answer you this way? And I promise I will address the 21 years when I get to it. But what I'd like to say is this, and I have had this discussion with the acting general manager this afternoon, in fact. The thing to remember is that the council, the governing body, the group of you councillors, you own these functions. They belong to you under the Local Government Act. Your role under the Local Government Act is to direct and control the affairs of the council. So note the words direct and control. That's your role. So you have a very broad and powerful role. And furthermore, your role is to keep the performance of the council under review. So your remit under the Local Government Act is extremely broad and extremely important. So that's the first thing. Every function under the Local Government Act that's not specified as belonging to the General Manager belongs to the councillors in a meeting of the council, whether it be a council meeting or a committee meeting that has delegations. Therefore, it is important that you're comfortable with the functions you delegate because they're your functions. So now to come to your question about 21 years, look, I can't say to you that 21 years is appropriate or inappropriate. What I can say to you is that I agree. It seems to me to be a longish period of time. And secondly, if you're more comfortable with 10 years, then that you are perfectly entitled to limit the delegations to 10 years. It's as simple as that. It's what you're comfortable with. The other thing to say is at the end of the day, even if you were to delegate the functions and limit them, in relation to leases and license and limit them to 10 years, remember that there are always other checks and balances you can put in place, such as a good call-ups policy, meaning that notwithstanding that you've delegated the function to the general manager, if you have a call-ups policy, you can always give the general manager notice that you wish to call a matter up to the council and determine it yourself. And in that circumstance, the general manager would not actually be able to exercise the delegation. So, look, it's a slightly long answer, but I think it's important for the context. I think the bottom line is you need to be comfortable with the period of time and I think focus carefully on the conditions, the limitations that you impose in relation to each delegation.
Thank you for that answer. Another question, if I may. Do these current delegations, as they stand in the recommendation, can the general manager grant owner's consent on behalf of council under the current delegations for any DAs or any other purpose?
So when you say current delegations, do you mean the ones in existence at the moment that you're about to revoke and replace with the new ones, or do you mean under this new instrument?
Let's say under the new instrument that's been recommended.
Yeah. Yes, under the new instrument, the general manager could grant owner's consent on behalf of the council. And the question for you is whether you agree with that or not. And if you don't, then you should impose it as an exclusion.
And so could that be applied that, for example, you could exclude owner's consent being granted on particular properties, for example?
You could on particular properties, or you could in particular other circumstances, or just generally? It would be a matter for you. So owner's consent is generally granted in two situations. One is the council is developing its own land. The council is considering a development application by somebody else to develop council land, and the council needs to grant them owner's consent to lodge a development application relating to the council's land. The question then is whether or not you should allow them to lodge a development application, and it's a matter for you as to whether you would want the governing body to know about that and determine that by resolution, or whether or not you would give that power to the general manager, or, as you say, whether there would be some kinds of circumstances for properties when you would want to do it yourself rather than have him do it under delegated authority.
Okay, thank you. Sorry,
Sorry.
Councillor Green. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just following up on that. Isn't it also true, Lindsay, that in some circumstances the council cannot deny owner's consent?
There are some circumstances. The Land and Environment Court has held that. So that's getting, I mean, you make a good point, that's getting into a technical part of the law, but it is true that the council has a right, I think I could describe it as a general right as a landowner to decide whether or not it grants owner's consent, but then there are some specific circumstances that the court has said it has no right to refuse. And the reason why the latter occurs, Councillor Green, is because the court's view is that the council has, it's essentially a conflict of interest issue. The council should allow a development application to be lodged so that it is assessed and determined rather than use its owner's consent function to prevent the lodgement of an application.
Okay, do any other councillors have any other questions on the list?
Through you, Madam Chair. Dr. Tanner, I'm looking at clause 377, general power of the council to delegate. I'm also where it says that other than the following, which is the exclusion.
Yes.
Exclusions of delegations. I'm going to 1G. The voting of money for expenditure on its works, services or operations. I find that a bit unworkable. The council officers are spending money all the time, and you can't sort of stop them from spending on each. What do you have to vote on each individual? How does this work, Dr. Tanner?
Yes. So is that the Mayor speaking? Is that Councillor Catras?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Hello, Councillor Catras. That's a really good question. What that's really alluding to is the appropriation of money in the council's budget. So each year, probably round about now, or it might have happened a little earlier than now, you're presented with your draft operational plan and for the next financial year, and in it is your revenue policy, and in that within that you have your budget. And when you resolve to adopt the operational plan containing, as it does, the revenue policy and the budget, that is when you appropriate money for the following year's expenditure. What Section 377 is saying is that you can't delegate the adoption of your annual budget effectively. If you're going to appropriate money for work, services and operations for the next financial year, the council has to do it. And then the Local Government Act, the Local Government regulations say that if the council wishes to spend money that wasn't appropriated in its budget for expenditure, then the council must do so only by resolution. So the scheme of the Local Government Act at the end of the day is that any money that is spent by the council must be either appropriated for expenditure in your annual budget, or if it isn't, must be appropriated by way of a resolution of the council. So that's what it's talking about. But what it's not talking about Mr. Mayor, is the decision to spend money on X, Y, or Z if the budget appropriates money for that purpose. So if I could give you the example of legal services, for example, each year the council's budget will appropriate a certain amount of money for legal services. So it's the appropriation that the council has to do by resolution, but the decision of the general manager, for example, to spend it on some particular thing, that's his or her decision, provided there's money in the budget for it.
Thank you.
Okay, I have another question. With the instrument of delegation that is proposed, can the general manager make decisions on rental subsidies under this delegation?
That's a good question. So I have to say I'm not particularly familiar with the process of making decisions about rental subsidies, but do those decisions involve, if you don't mind me asking, do they involve some kind of decision about spending some money or reducing something, or I mean, do they have a financial context to them? Can you comment?
Yeah, like an example I would give is where there might be an application from one of council's tenants to get a reduction in rent for a period of time. So it would have a cost to council because they would be receiving less rent.
I see.
Yeah, so that's the example
Yes.
I was referring to.
Yes, yes. Look, I think the delegations would. I think they're broad enough to give the general manager that power. And so once again, if that's a matter of concern for the councillors, then that should be reflected in either an exclusion from the delegations or at least something that's subject to some conditions or limitations.
Okay. Thank you. And I just have one further question. What is the contract value that can be awarded under these current delegations?
Right. The delegations as they stand don't specify a limitation from or an amount from memory, and I'm just having a quick look at them. Yeah, no, that's right. So the instrument of delegation that you have in front of me, in front of you, it does not limit the value of a contract that the general manager can award. And so don't confuse the process with the amount. And by that I mean it doesn't matter whether there's been a tender or not been a tender. That's the procurement process. Irrespective of the process, there's nothing here that says that the general manager cannot enter into a contract with a value of more than a specified amount. So if you want to limit, similar to the way you limit the amount that can be written off, for example, if you wish to specify an amount above which only the council can enter into a contract, then that should be written into the delegations.
Okay, and just to the acting general manager has a comment, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to confirm that with the acting general manager. I understood we did have a limit without tender. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, yes, we do. But again, it comes down to the value, and it also comes down to how that tender is put to the market. You know, whether it's put to the market as part of the local government procurement pre-tendered list that they have, which under Section 55 gives us the opportunity to select one of those firms, companies, consultants, whatever it might be, under the local government procurement list that has already been, as I say, it's gone through all the due diligence prior to that them being included on the list. Just a question that I was going to, does that answer, Councillor Green?
Yeah, as I said, there's already limitations, so you're correct. Yeah.
There are.
Okay.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Dr. Taylor, I just wanted to make sure that I was on the right track here, and that is if we go to tender, the tender goes to council with the recommendation from the officer, and the council adopts that recommendation, and it might be a tender for, I don't know, we'll go with $8 million. And as part of that process, they receive progress payments towards the completion of that tender. So that means that I would be approving a $2 million expenditure if there were 4 progress payments. So would that fall under that category where it states that what contract value can be awarded under the current delegations? That to me would mean that I would have to at least have a delegation in that process of $2 million to allow me to approve the payment for that progress payment.
Yep. So the answer to your question, David, is that the first decision for the council is whether it enters into the contract. So let's say, I think you said $8 million. Let's talk to the instrument the councillors have in front of them. The instrument doesn't specify whether they or you would be the person who could make that decision. So in other words, there's no limitation on you making that decision. So you could make that decision under delegated authority, but it would be a very, very large amount of money for a general manager to decide contract value wise under delegated authority. So that's the first thing. But let's just say the council resolves to enter into the contract having a value of $8 million, then it's going to be the contract that requires the making of progress payments. There is no further decision to be made. The council is bound by the contract, and there's no distinction between you as general manager or the councillors. The councillors as the governing body here. If the contract requires the progress payments to be made, then they must be made. So the issue of delegations doesn't arise at that point.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the other councillors have any more questions on that part of the recommendation?
Just a brief one, Madam Chair, and I walked in a little bit after this discussion had started, but just a question through you, Madam Chair, to the acting general manager or possibly even Dr. Taylor. Is there an industry, is there like a local government standard of because I'm mindful of when it becomes like the governing body isn't getting involved in this delegation, approving this delegation, and the fine line between it then getting into the operational perspectives of council and how far we can actually get involved. So is there a standard by which is acceptable through the local government space on this?
To Dr. Taylor, that's a question from Councillor Elmere. If you could respond, please.
Yes, it's a really good question. The answer is that there's no formalised industry standard of which I'm aware. The closest you come to seeing an industry standard is to do a review of what councils generally do with their delegations. My understanding is that your officers have done that. I can say, working for 50 or 60 councils as I do, that this instrument of delegation is not unusual in its approach. That is to delegate all of the council's functions subject to whatever it is you wish to hold back or impose conditions on. So it's quite usual in that regard. I think I could say it's industry standard in that regard. I do think the important thing for you, though, is to look at it carefully and decide whether you are happy with the exclusions the conditions, the limitations in this instrument, and whether there are any others you want, and that would be the right thing to do. Could I just, if I may, off the back of that question, could I just say to the council that there are a whole lot of safeguards for the council when it does decide to give delegations, and there's a couple of very important ones that the councillors would like to be aware of, I'm sure. The first is that in the law there's a notion of concurrency. The law says that notwithstanding that you have delegated something, you may still exercise the function yourself. So what that means is when you delegate functions to the general manager, you are not parting with the power. You're not giving the power away. What you're doing is sharing it, and you may always say to the delegate, the general manager, no, on this occasion we want to exercise that delegation. And that's why I say it's important to have good reporting and good call-up policies. You are always able to revoke delegations. You can revoke them completely. You can partly revoke them. You can always amend them from time to time. And so at the end of the day, the councillors always remain in control of the delegations. I think the most important thing for that purpose, for the council remaining in control of delegations, is to require regular reporting from the general manager on the use of the delegations, to require the general manager to notify you when the general manager proposes to exercise important delegations. So not the trivial day-to-day ones, but the really important ones, the kinds of things we've been talking about tonight, to give you prior notice, and for you to be able to pull any of those matters up to council if you wish. So my apologies for the length of that answer, but hopefully it's useful information for you.
Thank you. Councillor Emily, you have another question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. It's just a brief one, but how often should this instrument of delegation be reviewed, in your opinion, Dr. Taylor?
Well, that's a very good question as well. The delegations must be reviewed within 12 months of each ordinary election, so that's the statutory period. So your delegate, I realise you're doing them now, but if you weren't doing them now, they would have had to have been done by December of this year. My understanding is that the next local government elections, I only found this out last week, tell me if I'm wrong, I thought they were 4 years away, but I believe they're actually going to occur in 2024, I think. So these delegations might last for a shorter period than they normally do. But to answer your question, I think if you're receiving regular reports from the general manager on the way he is exercising the delegations, and then he gives you an annual report on the exercise of the delegations, I think you should be casting your eyes over them every 12 months, to be honest, from a governance point of view. Now, you might not step in and change anything, but I would think that to let the delegations go unreviewed for 4 years is probably too long. And so, as I say, I think it's important to put in good reporting requirements so that you can monitor the way they're being exercised, and also to ask for an annual report on them as well.
Thank you. Any other councillors have any other questions? No? Well, thank you, Dr. Taylor. I found that very informative and useful information. And I don't know whether the mover and seconder would like to maybe perhaps, there's been a lot of information that's been provided to us tonight, and perhaps this is something we maybe could send to the full council meeting for all of the other councillors to listen to and consider before making a decision. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I'm happy to do that, yeah. Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm happy to do that.
And is the seconder? Okay, so are we happy to have an amendment to defer this item to the full council meeting?
Just one question. Through the chair, Dr. Tanner, I remember a while back you waved this bunch of papers that said these are all the delegations the mayor, the general manager has. Would you still have that document?
Oh yes. Now, Councillor Catras, they weren't delegations. They were the specific functions given to both the mayor and general manager under the legislation. So what I did is I did a scan of the Local Government Act and some other fairly important acts and looked for every single section that said the general manager may or the general manager must or the mayor may or the mayor must. And there was a really, really big long list, particularly for the general manager, and I'm more than happy to provide that to the council. But just be aware that whilst they are functions given to the general manager and the mayor by the legislation, they're not delegations. That's a different thing.
That's fair enough. Through the chair, I'd like to see that. I'm sure that other councillors might like to see that. If you don't mind emailing it to the general manager, maybe circulate it if that's okay with Madam Chair.
Yes, if Dr. Tell's happy, that'd be excellent information. Thank you. Okay, so the recommendation is that the consideration of this matter be deferred to the 23rd of May council meeting. That's been moved by Councillor Symington and seconded by Mayor Catras. If the staff could please take a vote.
Madam Chair, your vote, please.
Yeah, I'm for the motion.
Councillor Green.
For the motion.
Councillor Jamieson.
For the motion.
Councillor Marnie.
For.
Councillor Symington.
For.
Councillor Catras, Mr Mayor.
For.
And I note that Councillor Elmere is in the room, but as a non-voting member of the committee.
Thank you. I'll declare that motion carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move to the next item. Do we need Dr. Taylor to stay on? Sorry, I was just checking whether we needed Dr. Taylor to stay on the call. I don't think we do. So thank you, Dr. Taylor, for your time tonight and providing all of that information. And yeah, if there's any other queries, we'll let you know. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, councillors. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Dr. Taylor.
Okay, well, councillors, we'll move on to the next item, which is FIN 021-22, which is the investment report as at the 31st of March 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
You move that way.
Councillor Green moving and Councillor Marnie seconding. Thank you. Do any councillors have any questions or comments or queries on the investment report for the acting general manager? No? Okay, we'll put that item then. If the staff could please take the vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Your vote, please.
For the motion.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Jamieson.
For.
Councillor Marnie.
For.
Councillor Symington.
For.
And Councillor Catras, Mr Mayor.
For.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. I declare that motion carried unanimously. And councillors, we'll move to the final item on tonight's paper, which is FIN 022-22, the quarterly budget review for the period ended 31st of March 2022. Can I have a mover? Mayor Catras, thank you. And Mayor Councillor Marnie, seconded. Thank you. Councillors, any questions or comments on the quarterly budget review? No questions or comments? Okay, we'll put that motion. Thank you.
Madam Chair, your vote, please.
For the motion.
Councillor Green.
For.
Councillor Jamieson.
For.
Councillor Marnie.
For.
Councillor Symington.
For.
Councillor Catras.
For.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. We'll declare that motion carried unanimously. Councillors, there being no further business on the agenda, I declare the meeting closed at 6:54 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance.
Thank you. Evening all.
Thank you.